Hi, my name is Caitlin Jarvis. Let me share my screen because I did whip up a little PowerPoint for this presentation. I should say this is the second time I have recorded it because the first time I didn't set an alarm and now I talked for 20 minutes. So I am excited to be here today to talk about this paper, Sense-Making Processes in an Organizational Communication or an Organizational Crisis, a case study analysis of the NFL cheerleaders lawsuits. Like most papers, I think, that get to the conference stage after months and months, this paper has gone through a number of different transitions. I first presented it at the SportsCom conference in Boise, which seems like years ago. I guess it was years ago. And now, after getting such helpful feedback from the reviewers and really thinking about where I want this paper to go, it is now almost an entirely new paper. But I'll talk about those changes at the end. But I did want to hold true to the paper I originally submitted way back in March, which seems like a while ago and also like yesterday. Anyway, let's dive into it. So, like I said, my interest, or I didn't say this, but my interests are really aligned with organizational processes and organizational identity. And so I was primarily interested in figuring out what we could learn about NFL cheerleaders from studying the way in which they responded to the lawsuits they filed. So press releases, public statements, interviews, things like that. Because most of the research within sports communication and elsewhere on professional NFL cheerleaders, the cat has decided now is a good time for an exercise routine. So I apologize if there's background noise. Most of the research on NFL cheerleaders has to do with disordered eating practices, fan experiences, super hypersexualized counterparts to the toxic masculinity of the NFL. And this is all well and dandy, but it doesn't really answer anything about or address anything about what it means to be a cheerleader, what the experience of the cheerleaders are like. They're almost always just a foil for masculinity. So as you might have known, over the last few years, about the last 6 years, more and more cheerleaders have filed lawsuits against their independent NFL franchise teams for wage theft, gender discrimination, and sexual harassment. And I found these lawsuits interesting. What I was aiming to do in this paper was take a sense-making angle to understand how we could use sense-making to explore professional culture and professional identity. The thing I love about sense-making is it is so geared on shared experiences. And if we share experiences, if we all undergo something together, like if we all experience a varied form of sexual harassment while also identifying as an NFL cheerleader, then we can begin to develop a certain cultural identity around that. So I explored how sense-making was communicated within the cheerleaders by cheerleaders who sued the NFL or sued NFL franchises, because two cheerleaders, Bailey Davis and Kristen Ware, sued Roger Goodell and the NFL writ large. But the other cheerleaders from the Texans and the Raiderettes and the Buffalo Jills and the Miami Dolphins, actually I'm not sure about the Miami Dolphins, but the other cheerleaders sued their individual franchises. Okay, getting distracted by the cat. Let me move this up here. So I looked at 11 news articles and analyzed kind of the way in which this information was presented. But I focused primarily on what the cheerleaders were disclosing to reporters, because I was interested in getting this perspective from the cheerleaders' own voice. I would love, eventually, one day, hopefully, to interview NFL cheerleaders. But for now, all I had was access to these press releases and these interviews that the cheerleaders did. So I inductively coded them, looking for signs of sense-making processes. And what I found was 3 general sense-making ideas that could help us pinpoint a professional identity or a professional culture. The first was disidentification. There were statements that the cheerleaders made in interviews, like Kristen Davis and talking to, I think that should also actually say Kristen Ware, but Kristen Ware talking to Ken Belson, how she recoils when she enters a restaurant and sees there's an NFL game on television. Or Kelly Newer talking about how the Texans did not care about her rights as a professional, as a woman, or as part of the Houston community. Or Angelina Rosa telling us that she felt ashamed by her body because of this mistreatment she had gone through at the hands of her coaches. These three statements kind of highlight different aspects of the same disidentification process. Kristen Ware is talking about disidentification from the NFL at large. She talks about not being able to see a game on TV without being reminded of her legal battles. Kelly Newer more specifically talks about disidentification from the team that she was a part of. In fact, she's starting to talk about some liminal aspects of her identity as a cheerleader, right? That she doesn't really see herself as part of the Houston Texans team, and her identity as a professional cheerleader and even as a woman is ignored by her team. So she's existing in this in-between state. And Angelina Rosa talks about disidentification from her body. There is this sense that after going through so much abuse, so this picture over here is of the Texans cheerleaders making a press release after they filed their lawsuit against the NFL, and their lawyer here is holding up a piece of a roll of duct tape because the cheerleaders were often duct taped, their bodies were duct taped in their problem areas. And so Angelina Rosa is talking about how this continued abuse de-identified her with her body. And I need to speed up here. So the other thing I was going to talk about was cultural tensions, but you can get at that. You can begin to see those within the statements about disidentification as well, that there is this part that cheerleaders are ignored as professionals. But there is also this part, there is a cheerleading identity that is unique to the cheerleaders themselves, that is void of the NFL and the NFL teams. So I was really interested in theorizing how sense-making could be influenced by these cultural contexts, by these double binds, by these negotiation processes. But what I began to think about was the fact that what I was writing about wasn't really related to the cheerleaders per se. It was related to what the reporters were disclosing about the cheerleaders. And so more recently, my collaborator, Jessica Welch, and I have collected 52 articles that were reported on cheerleader lawsuits just in 2014. So we ignored more recent lawsuits in favor of a more exclusive, in-depth look at one calendar year. And we began to think about agenda setting and how media was shaping discussions about these cheerleader lawsuits. We looked specifically at sense-making within agenda setting and found that oftentimes the lawsuits were communicated through a victim-blaming or profession-blaming lens. There were a lot of elements of voyeurism within the lawsuits. Reporters might talk about how, or might suggest that maybe the cheerleaders are getting their comeuppance for being maybe the popular girls in high school, almost like they deserve the abuse, not only because they chose to be cheerleaders, but because they're beautiful women. It's yucky. And these same tropes of blaming, of comeuppance, are parlayed against discourses of empowerment, choice, and sexual subjectification. The cheerleaders are choosing to be sexual subjectified. The cheerleaders are empowered by not only making a lawsuit, but they were empowered when they became cheerleaders. And there is a lot of constraints to unpack. And so this is the paper that we are currently, well, it's written and it's under review right now, but this is the paper we are hoping to continue revising as it goes under review. And hopefully next year at NCA or whenever we reunite at the Sports Communication Conference, I will have this paper to share with you. So I thank you for listening to this presentation. Like all presentations, there's so much I could say about this topic. And so if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. My email is jarvis10@purdue.edu. I hope you all are enjoying your virtual NCA. it is October 24th, so it's kind of crazy to think that when NCA actually rolls around, things will be different. Anyway, have a great afternoon. Bye.